person who is involved in this case, who has been convicted, the former Prime Minister, happened to be a politician. He happened to be the former Prime Minister of Pakistan. He happened to be the chairman of the People's Party. But that does not make him or anybody else above the law.
Pakistan's General Muhammad Zia-ul-Haq taking a firm line on justice and referring, of course, to the man he's recently replaced as the leader of Pakistan, a man currently under sentence of death and now literally fighting for his life. This man, Zulfiqar Ali Bhutto. For 2 decades, Bhutto's been at the center of Pakistan's politics, and he still has a strong following. The peak of Bhutto's power and the start of his downfall came with elections last March, when his ruling Pakistan People's Party, the PPP, and its allies scooped 4/5 of the 200 seats at stake. It was the first parliamentary election under civilian rule in the whole of Pakistan's 30-year history, and Bhutto claimed a landslide. But his jubilation was to be short-lived. There were widespread rumors of rigging. Bhutto himself was accused by his critics of fixing the results and of misappropriating government funds. To begin with, the accusations were whispers, but for Bhutto, far worse was to come. Bhutto's probably the ablest politician in his country, and his years in office put him way ahead of his rivals in terms of experience. He's held almost every government portfolio at some time in his career. He's a renowned diplomat, and he has always been intensely ambitious. He was born into a wealthy and well-connected family, and that, in Pakistan, makes him one of the chosen few. Having reached the pinnacle of power, he's now shackled to his bed in prison, found guilty of murder and accused of corruption. When Bhutto entered politics, Pakistan was under the stern rule of this man, President Ayub Khan, the military dictator who seized control in October 1958 after a coup d'etat. Ayub ruled with a firm hand. He dismissed political parties as irrelevant and pledged himself to solving the country's enormous economic and social problems with his own personal brand of rule. When Ayub took over, Ali Bhutto was invited to join the cabinet as Minister of Commerce. Some said it was a reward for having helped to plan the coup. Whether that is so or not, it was the strongman Ayub who gave Bhutto his first real taste of political might. Under Ayub, Bhutto was to head the ministries of Reconstruction and Information, Kashmir Affairs, Minority Affairs, Fuel and Power. In 1966, he left Ayub's government, later to emerge at the head of his own PPP party.
They survive by the strength of their faith and character. May God grant us the courage to face this trial with unity and determination.
You see, our country...
General Yahya Khan was Pakistan's next leader. He took over when Ayub stood down in March 1969. Yahya began organizing an interim government, promising a return to democracy and civilian rule after elections the following December. Mr. Bhutto himself was working independently towards the same goal. But when President Yahya finally announced his government, Bhutto was in it, becoming Yahya's deputy prime minister and foreign minister. Yahya Khan's own career, or at least the ending of it, might well have served as a signpost to Bhutto of what fate lay ahead. Yahya, too, was soon to find himself under arrest, vilified by opponents and former supporters alike. Ironically, that happened within days of his handing over power to none other than Mr. Bhutto. General Yahya Khan had found running Pakistan as president every bit as dangerous as anything he'd faced as a soldier. That should have proved a valuable lesson for Ali Bhutto. In the months before the 1970 elections, Mr. Bhutto had demonstrated that he had a large personal following in West Pakistan. Rightly, he predicted a split between East and West Pakistan, and it was when that split became a reality that Yahya lost power and Bhutto took over. Though East Pakistan paid dearly in blood for the Bangladesh War of 1971, it was also a watershed for West Pakistan and Mr. Bhutto. Discontent had been brewing for years in the eastern half of the country, which wanted its independence. It came to a head in December 1971, when open war broke out between India and Pakistan. Indian troops had intervened on the side of the eastern breakaway region. The fighting was short and sharp, and Pakistan suffered a heavy defeat. Pakistan's armed forces in the east surrendered to India after 2 weeks of bitter battle. Morale in the west was shattered. 75 million Pakistanis became citizens of a new state called Bangladesh, or Bengal Nation. For the supporters of a united Pakistan, it was a catastrophe, but there was no time for tears. Pakistan needed a skilled and practical leader in charge of picking up the pieces. As the Bangladesh flag was raised in villages all over the east, the beaten west had also to begin anew. Amid the chaos and confusion following the hostilities, Bhutto seemed the only man able to command a national following. With the humiliation of defeat still echoing around Pakistan's towns, villages and corridors of power, President Yahya tumbled from office in disgrace. President Bhutto was installed within weeks of the end of the war, and 3 days later, the former president, Yahya Khan, was placed under house arrest.
I do not want to cover the past. I do not want to
Bhutto was a truly popular choice for president. A strong orator and personality, he promised an attractive left-wing program. From the outset, though, it proved difficult to achieve. Losing the Bengalis of the East certainly didn't mean all the voices of dissent had been removed from Pakistan. With another breakaway movement in the northwest frontier district and political opposition nationwide, President Bhutto found that much of his energy had to be devoted to maintaining the rule of law. But Bhutto had seen the fate of autocrats from close quarters, and it wasn't a role he wanted to play himself. Virtually his first message as president was for the people of Pakistan to share some of the burden of responsibility by giving its government a chance to put the country back on course.
I am prepared to make every endeavor to swing it. So this is my message to the world and to the people of Pakistan. Have faith, have confidence in your elected leaders. I tell the armed forces, please be patient. I am going to restore communication with you.
The trappings of his position as head of state suited Mr. Bhutto, and he suited them. A highly cultured man, an Oxford-educated lawyer from an aristocratic family of landowners, he found no difficulty handling occasions like this. Bhutto was leader of a Pakistan beset with problems: security, poverty, illiteracy, health, with the threat of famine and flood never far away. But 12 months after coming to power, he certainly seemed to be getting a grip on domestic affairs. Foreign aid and foreign exchange reserves were rising, so were cotton exports. Here at Rawalpindi, Bhutto told Pakistani envoys, "The worst days are over." A year later, he confidently stepped down as president to be sworn in as Pakistan's first prime minister for 15 years. Even so, he remained the man in charge and very much a realist, masterminding a reconciliation with Sheikh Mujib, the man who had led the Bangladesh breakaway, and with Mrs. Gandhi, who'd backed the rebellion. This meeting in February 1974 was a turning point in relations between Pakistan and Bangladesh. When Sheikh Mujib paid a one-day visit to Pakistan, simultaneously both countries accorded the other recognition. The way the old wounds were healed was typical of Mr. Bhutto's skill in diplomatic relations. Since last year, there has been turmoil in Pakistan's internal affairs. During the first quarter of 1977, more than 270 people died in disturbances, and by April, curfew and martial law had been imposed on the major cities of Karachi, Lahore and Hyderabad. The reason for the civil disobedience and Mr. Bhutto's clampdown? The allegations that he'd stayed in power by rigging the elections last March. While much of the country was gripped by strikes or curfew, Bhutto reacted by promising to set up an inquiry to investigate the elections. Complaints were received by an elections commission about the handling of polling in 30 constituencies. And after he was sworn in again as Prime Minister, Mr. Bhutto admitted that there had been what he called excesses and malpractices, but he denied it had been government policy to manipulate the poll. As tension increased, several curfew breakers were shot. Mr. Bhutto's right to impose martial law was ruled unconstitutional by Lahore High Court. Diplomats and MPs resigned in protest against Mr. Bhutto. Though the curfew and other emergency laws halted the momentum of opposition to Mr. Bhutto, the Prime Minister had become reliant on the loyalty of the army, a move that was to prove costly in the coming months. Rawalpindi saw some of the worst of the rioting against the Bhutto government's policies and the imposition of martial law. This demonstration was staged by the Pakistan National Alliance, who spearheaded demands for the Prime Minister's resignation and fresh elections. As Pakistan erupted over the election allegations, foreign correspondents pointed out the irony of the situation. Rigged or not, they said, Mr. Bhutto would almost certainly have won a massive victory. While the elections were underway, the seeds of Mr. Bhutto's undoing were undoubtedly being sown. A man who played a part in the downfall of the two previous regimes, he was himself about to be toppled, many say a victim of his own popularity. For most of Bhutto's supporters claim that the election irregularities were the work of overzealous party workers who believed they were acting in the interests of the Prime Minister. The irregularities proved perfect ammunition for Bhutto's enemies. The next chapter opened in July, when the army took control in a bloodless coup, arresting prominent members of the government and deposing Bhutto. General Zia, the army chief of staff, declared another state of martial law and explained that he had taken over to avoid imminent civil war. General Zia described the takeover as a 90-day operation to return the country to democracy and promised elections by last October. They are yet to take place. It was in the process of the takeover that Mr. Bhutto was charged with fixing the March election and misappropriating funds. A private prosecution was also brought against him, alleging that he and 4 other men conspired in the murder of Ahmad Khan, the father of one of Bhutto's most outspoken critics, who was shot in 1974. The accusation sparked off protests both inside and outside Pakistan. Mr. Bhutto's supporters abroad were stunned. But even more shocking was the trial that followed, Mr. Bhutto's conviction on the murder charge and the sentence of death that was passed on him. Passions ran high. This demonstration in London was mirrored wherever there was a Pakistani community. Diplomats and political leaders around the world have also said they're disgusted by the sentence. Mr. Bhutto was given a scant 7 days to appeal against the sentence, possibly so that international opinion would have little chance to interfere with the course of justice inside Pakistan. In the prison near Lahore, where Mr. Bhutto is kept, he's said to have been denied all privileges apart from a bed and half an hour's exercise each day. His lawyers waited until the last of their 7 days before filing their appeal. They claimed that instead of a week, they should have been given a month.
It's all right.
Their appeal argues that the trial was unfair, the Chief Justice biased, that General Zia prejudiced the outcome by saying that Bhutto was a murderer, and finally, that the judgment was more of a political speech than a legal document when it implied that Bhutto was not a good Muslim and not fit to be Prime Minister. We spoke to one of Mr. Bhutto's 16 lawyers and asked why they claimed the trial had been unfair.
Yes, it wasn't a fair trial because you see, actually when these murder trials are held, they're held before one single judge. And now in this trial, what happened was that they brought 5 judges in, 4 judges plus the Chief Justice of the Punjab, which is not fair. There should have been 1 judge. Why 5 judges? We simply don't understand. Because the judges were absolutely against Bhutto, the PPP party, and they just wanted to crush Bhutto and PPP through Bhutto. That is why.
So you think that you're claiming that they were totally partial? I mean, totally biased, is that what you're saying?
They are. And the way they behaved in the court, never in the history has happened like that, you see. None of our confrontations or whatever we wanted to record, they were not brought on the record. And actually, the way they behaved towards Bhutto was, being the ex-Prime Minister, they shouldn't have done like that. Because
how did they behave?
I mean, whenever he wanted to clear his position, or whenever he wanted to stand up and say a point, my lord, they used to say, oh, you please sit down. One of the judges said, we don't care if we know you've been the Prime Minister, but who cares now? The bench was about to rise. And Bhutto said, sir, I'm very depressed and upset and I want few words. And he said, no, Mr. Bhutto, we don't care. And he says, but look here, you are trying to be rude. And he said, I'm not trying to be rude. My wife is in such a position, in such a condition, and I want to make a few submissions. But actually the Chief Justice, he got annoyed and he turned him out of the court and told the policemen to drag him out of the court till he comes into his senses, which is very unfair. You see, at time, actually he was a Prime Minister at one time. And why should he be treated in that way?
Are you therefore confident about the appeal?
Yes, we are, because you see, this is a case of no evidence. There's nothing in the case is absolutely innocent. And you know, this is the first judgment in which 5 judges unanimously pass the death sentence. Otherwise, the judges usually differ at one point, at one stage, at some of the evidence. But here, the 5 judges unanimously passed the judgment. One judge wrote the judgment, and the others have said, I agree, I agree, I agree, I agree. Actually, this is not a fair and free trial. Not only me as an advocate, but even people on the streets, people who are beggars, people who are shopkeepers, they all, you know, they grieve over it. What kind of judgment is this?
General Zia is determined that international opinion should not affect the outcome. A final appeal for clemency could be directed at him as chief executive, but he won't be drawn about what his reaction would be if one were made. Immediately after the coup, he was quoted as saying that he sought no punishment for Mr. Bhutto. Why then was Mr. Bhutto under sentence of death?
Justice must be done. And nobody is above the law according to my conviction, whether it is Mr. A, Mr. B, or General Ziaul-Haq himself. And justice must be done.
That you have a military government at the moment in Pakistan would influence the courts, must influence them.
We can't. As I said before you, that although this is supposed to be a military government, but we have not abrogated the Constitution. The Constitution is still in, technically speaking, held in abeyance, but we are following it more strictly, that just because there happened to be a martial law, the military government can or will influence the court is totally wrong. They are independent, and we respect their freedom. And I have always said that the judiciary must be independent of the executive, and they must do what the justice demands.
Have you discussed the case with, say, the Supreme Justice? Or?
No, sir. It's up to the judges to decide the court. I've read the verdict, yes.
But you've not in any way advised, counseled, discussed?
It's not done. If it can be done in England, well, I don't know. It's certainly not done here.
We asked the General if the appeal could delay his plans for a return to democracy.
We are committed. We are totally committed to revive the democratic procedures in this country. And the first basic step is the elections. And it is my effort, my government's effort, my colleagues' efforts, and except for an odd party, totally we are all endeavoring to create an atmosphere where we could hold free and fair elections. And more than that, to see that the results of the elections are positive. Because elections for the sake of elections is not the answer. Elections must bring out a positive result in the form of a somewhat stable political government.
This year, it was General Zia who was the guest of honour at Royal Pindi Racecourse for Pakistan's National Day, and for the third time in its brief history, Pakistan was under the rule of a military government. The military government of General Zia clearly hopes the charge of murder has finally discredited Mr. Bhutto. But removing him from office by discrediting him, or even by actually carrying out the death sentence, may not eradicate his following. Millions of Pakistanis still respect him, despite his faults, as one of precious few politicians who ever put ordinary people first, and Bhutto himself is far from being a spent force. He once said, "If there's no democracy, I might not live to tell the tale." Strangely prophetic, perhaps. Meanwhile, as the army rattles its sabres, Bhutto's lawyers sharpen their swords to fight not just for his political future, but for Bhutto's life.